Hello. All right. I'm Chris Lucian. I'm the director of software development at Hunter Industries. Hunter is an irrigation company, so we do both commercial, residential, and agricultural irrigation, as well as home lighting. And our software team takes care of things like worldwide IoT systems, internal applications, and golf course irrigation style things. So. In 2011, my team and I had kind of come up with a new way of working, and it was based on a request for help. So initially, we had been doing some learning sessions and code katas to work on our test-driven development skills. But everybody was working by themselves. There was no pair programming or anything like that. We were doing kind of pure Kanban back then, but that was kind of the limit to it. As we began working together, when I hired on at Hunter, I had quickly been releasing software based on more of an agile manner than I think a lot of the team. And eventually, one of the developers, the senior most developer, actually realized that they would not hit their deadline for a time-sensitive application that needed to be released. So what happened is they asked for help. And they said, can we get into a conference room and work together on the software that I'm working on, just like we do with the code katas. And so we had a Randori style code kata where we passed the keyboard back and forth. All code had to be said out loud, verbalized. And over time, they saw that as a way to kind of begin working together. So this is kind of what it looked like after that. In the sense that we had begun mob programming together, and this is 4 or 5 developers at a single computer at the same time, two keyboards, 2 mice hooked up to that same computer, and a lot of great things happened after that. So after the first day, we had done a lot of retrospecting and things along those lines, and our retrospectives showed that things were going really well. This is the mob timer, so eventually we kind of created a open source application for rotating through on the keyboard, and this is to avoid having the noisy sound come up every time. So there's a lot of open source mob timers these days. We did this for about 4 years, and then the company said that everything that was coming out of this team was so high quality that they wanted to merge the teams with the external and internal development team and grow the practice. So about 2 years ago, this is the first time that the 2 teams came together, and we hired on 2 interns, so we started working in 2 mobs instead of just 1, and growing it out. And then this is kind of pictures of us just before that sort of growth. And here's kind of pictures of the team over time as we began hiring people on, and now we have even more people on the team. So this is kind of the rate of growth that we had. And so we were hiring about 2 people a month. We realized that there was some kind of culture loss, I guess, after we were hiring more than 2 people a month as we were adding them to the team. And I think that it's really important to kind of pay attention to the idea that the retrospectives and the learning hour are really kind of what got us to the point where we were experimenting frequently enough for iterating on our process, and we weren't getting stuck in old habits over and over again. So this is a kind of a visualization of our lofty goals. How do we interact? How do we code? How do we do business? How do we innovate? And so in the how do we interact section, we kind of talk about kindness, consideration, and respect. So in order to be able to do this well, we discovered, we had an initial working agreement around kindness, consideration, and respect. We treat each other with kindness, consideration, and respect. That means, no belittling people for their technical skills. We always build each other up, things along those lines. And I think that was a crucial foundational thing that we wanted to make sure that we had. With that came kind of this vulnerability, trust, and appreciation. So showing appreciation, trusting each other to do the right thing, being vulnerable, and things along those lines really helped grow that and made it made us able to work together. And then, of course, there are Google's studies on psychological safety and Amy Edmondson's research that kind of then played into it. And so these are some things that we built up over time as I go through these, but psychological safety was also very important, and you'll see more about that a little bit later. As far as how do we code, we have the concept of no in-between code and production, clean code, and Zaro Boogs, and I'll kind of go into those a little bit in more detail. So these days, no in-between code and production means that once you check in your code, your tests should be automated well enough that a continuous integration pipeline can take your code all the way out into your production environment. So we had gone a year and a half with no bugs coming out of our production software, and we were releasing twice a day to production. So clean code, this is the concept of Bob Martin's clean code book, and furthermore, any sort of just craftsmanship type skills going into the code base has also been very important for us as we grow this, because we want to continue with Zaro Boogs. The term Zaro Boogs comes from the Bugzilla software. When you run out of bugs to track in your bug tracker, it actually says Zaro Boogs. It's an acknowledgement that there are 0 known bugs, right? And so, but this is the idea that if you have Zaro Boogs, that means that you're not doing any rework. You're not spending the time and money on that effort. This section is deliver valuable working software to customers daily. Anyone can take a vacation at any time, 0 silos, and effective interdepartmental communication. So deliver working software to production daily. So this is the idea that, again, this is reinforcing the concept around automated testing and having no one in the pipeline that can block things going out, the software going out. And so in some cases we have product owners release gates and things along those lines. This is anyone can take a vacation at any time, 0 silos. So if you're working on a development team and you feel like if anyone on that team, if they left right now, the project would come to a stop, like that's an anti-pattern, right? And so this is a really important concept for us going forward, and this mob programming really helps that because it can distribute that knowledge pretty equally. This is effective interdepartmental communication, and so one thing that we have buy-in from the organization now with is having product owners be available to the teams all the time. And so we Kanban everything and prioritize everything task by task, so they need to be available at least daily to the teams. And then continuously develop lofty goals and practices, experiment frequently, and develop software continuously. So these are the concepts of having an experimentation process. So these are all, these are kind of just a number of months of retrospectives that come out of the team. We always have one action item. It's based on a hypothesis, and it's essentially an experiment. And so we try and make sure that we have a way of modifying our process as we go, and that goes into the lofty goals as well. Experimentation in general is very important. The reason I have this slide here is because we had put everything on wheels. We had mounted these TVs instead of having projectors. We had a lot of different experiments with our space and the way that we did our hardware. Even working in conferences, it kind of hurt your neck to look up or down and things along those lines, so it's important to focus on that. Then developing the software community. This is in particular going out to the user groups, speaking at different events. That's why I'm here today. I'm helping develop the software community, and that's really important to us as well. Now I can talk a little bit about the environment that we have. So this is the single setup. So these are two 80-inch Vizio TVs. They're 4K, and they have 80 hertz refresh rate. 60 hertz refresh rate. So what that does for us is it doesn't strain your eyes as much as you're looking at them. You'll also notice that they're lower than most conference room TVs or something like that. Like if you were mobbing on something like this, you crane your neck all day. That can really hurt. And that was actually feedback that we got from people. So these are right at eye level. Everybody can sit around here. Usually there's 2 keyboards and 2 mice, one ergonomic, one standard. And then we have the phone here for conversations with the product owner if they're not immediately available or if they're off-site. We have our whiteboard available. Typically, the teams have 1 to 2 of these rolling whiteboards available to them, and they have a physical Kanban board on there. And so we practice pure Kanban. There's no Scrum there, and it's important to note that a developer can go weeks without actually having to attend any meetings at all. They can be programming the entire time. And that's another side effect of this way of working, which is really nice. I can talk a little bit about the way that we do our interviews. So these are a few of our interns. So I'll talk first about our internship interview, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we hire on full-time developers. For our interview for the interns, we had 96 intern applicants last time, and so we needed to get them all through this interview. So we actually did 6 interns at a time, 6 intern candidates at a time, brought them in, had them mob together, and then as they rotated through the mob, we pulled them off to have one-on-one discussions with them, and then kind of ranked them that way, and was able to pull out really good intern candidates for this style of working, which is it was definitely an interesting process. For our traditional interview, for the normal interview, we had some instances where people were maybe afraid to program in front of 4 people when they came in, and they were kind of shocked to have that be the environment when they came in for the interview. So what we changed about it was when you come in for the interview initially, you sit down with one person, and then that person will have you implement a single unit test, so you can see if you know how to do unit testing. If not, they'll help you through the unit test and kind of teach you about it. Then we have them come out and we say, okay, now you're going to navigate in a mob, and you're going to do that same problem. So we have them do the exact same problem. So it's a kind of a slow transition into that role. And then from then on, we go through a number of technical problems, some with SQL database design and whiteboarding, some with refactoring, and then some with debugging. And so they do that totally verbally, so they're not allowed to touch the keyboard that entire time. They have to get us there through telling us what to do and how to do it. And that's been really effective. And then at the very end, we do a lean coffee exercise, which is a Kanban version of a conversation that we can prioritize conversation topics as we go forward. So this has been really effective for us to find out what they're interested in and to gain more knowledge about the candidate. We also put a focus on maintaining technical excellence. So this is a concept of budgeting for training, things along those lines. If you're watching the video before the beginning of the presentation, they had we have a 1-hour learning session time in the mornings, and then on the end of the day on Friday we have 2 hours. So we have about 7 hours a week budgeted for improving skills within the team. Because if your team members have a family at home, things along those lines, they get off work, they're not going to go and study, they're going to go spend time with their family. And so a lot of the time, we need to make sure that we can increase our ability to have technical excellence, or interpersonal excellence for that matter, by using those dedicated learning times. So again, we kind of focus on building up culture and building up the environment. So these are middle school students that came to program with us, and so in this particular slide here, we focus on building up the culture, building up the community as we go forward. And all these students here know how to unit test. They do test-driven development. They've made their own solutions for various things, and they're also potential candidates for our interviews in about 10 years. So. We have a flat department structure. So as we grew, this kind of expanded out to everything else that we were doing, and so we had about a 6-month period where there's no set manager for the group, and then the teams were merged, and I was put into the directorship of that position. And I had a retrospective with the team, and I said, how did the no manager thing work? So the team said that they really liked that. So actually, we don't have managers within the entire group, and then I try and practice kind of a pure servant leadership where I don't tell anyone what to do or how to do it. I just talk to them in kind of like situation behavior impact feedback format, so commonly known as the SBI feedback format, to help guide the teams, but I never dictate how they'll do their work, and that typically comes from decisions made within those retrospectives, and so with that we've had pretty big success in growing because the teams can decide for themselves how they do things, and then they can get together for department style decisions as well on a department level. So as we were growing, we had kind of the new people all the time, the grow and split sort of stuff, a lot of interruptions, this concept of retrospective saturation, where there are too many retrospectives happening and new people weren't getting the they're experiencing pain with how many retrospectives were happening, and so that it was kind of backing that off and then speeding it up a little bit more again later. Biannual goal setting, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then kind of the quality of the track record was wavering a little bit. As we brought on more people, it was harder to distribute that information, and so that zero silos thing became really hard, and kind of what we did in response to that was we expanded our automated testing and added integration testing as we grew in order to make it so that everybody knew how the application was supposed to run, and all the manual testing was all done in an automated way. That let us communicate across the entire group in that way. So the biannual goal setting. So this is the concept of, we had an HR requirement, and in HR they want us to come up with 2 goals for people every year to bring that out. And so traditionally that was it kind of felt like it was a little bit forced and things along those lines. We had a retrospective and said, how can we really make this effective? And what came out of that was this retrospective format here. And the main thing is that this is peer facilitated, so somebody finds another developer to go do this with. And then the output of that is some goals that they come and discuss with me, and then I put that into the HR system, and it's whatever they choose, and I kind of help guide them. So what happens here is this is a 6-month timeline, and on top are positive events that happened, and on the bottom are negative events that happened. And then these might be things like we deployed the software, or my car was hit, or something along those lines. And on the bottom are forces in your life. So you might have like a really supportive family, so that's a positive force on your life. But you might have a neighbor's dog that barks at you every morning, and so that might be a negative force on your life. And so, but of course this applies to technical and interpersonal things as well. And what I asked them to do is come up with a goal based on positive events, come up with a goal based on negative events, come up with a goal, 2 goals based on positive forces and 2 goals based on negative forces. So what happens is they come to me with 6 goals in the end. And these goals are really targeted goals because and personal to that person. And we were able to put those in to help them develop going forward. And this has been a really effective way of producing those goals. And then I kind of ask them questions to help them pick the most important one to work on in the next 6 months. And I think the way that I noticed that this really worked was we were doing a retrospective about this process, and we had somebody say, this is the first time in my entire career that an HR mandatory goal setting process has ever given me back a relevant goal to me. And so that was really powerful. And so I want to switch over to kind of talk about the process itself right now. And so I think the easiest way to do that is to kind of show the video of this. And I'll kind of walk you through our day. Oops, I don't have, let's see, exit the presentation. Okay. All right, good. So I'm going to walk us through a day of mob programming. So first hour of the day, learning sessions, and some teams start at different times, so they're doing a retrospective up here after their learning session. And it's important to kind of note that in that time, they're working together as a team, they're developing their skills and working on things as they go. Then 9 o'clock hits, they kind of get into real work. You can kind of see that people broke up and then kind of came back into the different teams. You'll notice that people are rotating through. So in this, we have no stand-up meetings, most meetings eliminated, and teams are already aligned. And so this is the concept that in a mob, you typically have the bandwidth to understand everything that's going on. Multiple mobs working together have the ability to send representatives to the other mobs to find out what's going on. So there's very little time spent meeting about these things, and the code keeps going forward. We have our CI/CD environment over there. Product owners come to visit the teams directly, and so this might be a phone call, this might be a active communication where they come in and talk to us, but it's really important to us to have frequent access to our product owners. You'll notice everybody's happy programmers working, functioning as actual teams, kind of very little infighting and things along those lines. These are information radiators all over the place about retrospectives and the different kind of systems that we use for management. Hand sanitizer to kind of keep everything clean. And so everybody's at lunch right now. This is the balloon floating there is because of somebody's birthday that day. And you can kind of see that. So they have about 7-minute rotations. Some people have 4 minutes. Some people go 15 minutes. Things along those lines. Driver navigator setup sort of thing. There are kind of these public workstations on the side for people to be able to access, they could pair on something real quick, but it's very rare, corporate stretching. So the cubicles actually for this many people would cost a lot more than each of these stations physically. So, for us, we found that out. Everything's on wheels. So this whole space here can be reorganized at any time, and we do frequently do that. Like, sometimes I come in and things are completely reorganized, and I'm like, oh, okay, and teams have moved around even. Yeah, so these are the whiteboards. We turned them so just for this video, so they would normally be blocking more of the of everything that's going on. There's me. I'm available but not annoying. So. Yeah, and then collaboration happening during the day. So this was a kind of a good day to take this video because we had a lot of interesting events. But this is how it looks every day. So we mob full time every day, here's the video that we had put together similarly for 2011. But I wanted to see if I could take any questions about any of this because I just talked a whole lot. Questions? Anyone? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, thank you very much for interesting your session. So, I wondering. So, are there any person who just stressed for the group work and for reputation of the and own skill does not effective in them. Some people would prefer to the alone programming and the alone work. So are there any the persons for the more programming?
For us, what happened initially, so we did have people that didn't want to pair in the very, very beginning, and eventually they agreed to do this instead. And so I've heard actually from a lot of people that this is much more comfortable than pairing because it's not just a one-on-one interaction where you are afraid to look bad in front of this one person, but it's a more supportive group of people. Of course, I think that we've had interview candidates that walked out of the interview because they just didn't want to work this way. So it's been kind of, that was part of it. But the people that were already working there and resistant to it began to realize that this was a much better way of working and things were breaking much less. Quality was way higher. The code readability was much higher. And so for us, we have people that get exhausted from being around so many people for a very long time, and we have areas that people can go sleep if they need to. But it's not uncommon, so they work, the 7-hour portion of the workday, together, and then they can do their learning session on their own if they wanted to. But during the day, it's rare to see people that are we need at least a pair for kind of code quality measures, but it's rare to see people pairing and over mobbing as they go. And there's no size restriction either. So it could be 3 people in a mob, or it can be 9 people in a mob. And as long as we kind of have a general rule is, if you're not contributing and you're not learning, then you can go to a different mob, and there's no there's no repercussion for that. And so yeah, it makes it kind of available. Yeah.
What's your personal evaluation system? How do you decide the salary of each developer?
Yeah, so this is majority nomination based. So this is the concept of I have a process that I meet with every developer in a one-on-one. They give me their nomination for the people that they believe should be promoted, and then I look at that and I just check if I agree, and then I go ahead and give them the promotions. And so it's decisions within the team, and also if you move around on a lot of teams, then and provide the value to those teams as you move around, then you can be more visible to the rest of the group. So it's kind of consensus based, and then I temper that with what I know about the team, but I rarely modify anything, if ever. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, I usually work with traditional style, then, but I have multiple tasks in one sprint. Then I sometimes get a new idea while in the bathroom or toilet. So you want to, I want to pause my task. Why? Until get new good idea. So I think some people want to pause, but people working together,
Yeah.
so they cannot stop thinking.
So
do you have any
yeah, so you're in a sprint though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that might be just a problem with sprints, necessarily not with, because I think the way that we do work is through Kanban. So once we're done with that task, we can reprioritize the tasks. So if you have a new idea or you want to spike on something, that's a totally valid thing to do. So in that group, you can say, so you could either peel away and try and spike on it on your own, and then bring that back to the team, and they can review it with you. Or what happens more commonly is, after we finish this task and deploy it to production, can we take a look at my idea? And the team will do that. So I think Kanban in general is very supportive of that concept, to bring in new work, as long as you get that thing in a vertical slice out to production right away. Yeah, it's a problem, I think. But in sprints, you kind of, you do your sprint estimation, and then you chart out what you're going to do. And I think even in that case, it's very hard to add something new into that sprint unless you have a really, supportive system.
Actually, for example, if I need to, for example, draw a system diagram, then I started drawing, but I couldn't get best idea. So I paused and start new task. Then while spending a few days, then I got new idea. So it's still, scope has not changed.
Oh, okay.
In that speed, but
Yeah. So yeah. So I think, in that case, a lot of it is that the mob, again, kindness, consideration, respect, and be vulnerable, hold trust. So if your team trusts you and we work toward building that trust, then something like that should be openly available. And I think that for a majority of our teams, that is very true. So.
Does your team start and then stop one task and then maybe start another one?
It's very rare for a mob to get stuck. So we have maybe 4 of our very senior engineers, and at any point you can ask one of them for help. and typically wherever they're working, they're just supporting the knowledge of the people that are also mobbing. And so, and we have this concept of navigate the navigator, and in the sense that if you're really senior, you shouldn't be talking the whole day. You shouldn't be navigating all the code. You should be maybe helping somebody who has a hard time navigating, give them the general idea of where to go and have them navigate instead. So this is a concept of like training them up and the zero silos thing. And so they're kind of always available. And so if there's some sort of thing where you're totally stuck and the team can't figure it out, there are different levels of it. So a mob might be stuck for a little while because maybe the expertise is not in the group there, but they can get up and just say, hey, as soon as you're done with what you're doing, can you come over and talk to us about this? And they're unstuck. And so I've had mob programming described to me to be very similar to a steamroller. It's slowly moving forward, but it never stops, right? And so this concept of maybe developing by yourself might feel a lot faster just because you might feel like you're getting some more code in there, but it's also much more likely for you to cause some sort of rework in breaking some dependency or something along those lines. And so when you're working together like that, very, very few things can actually stop that steamroller from moving forward. And typically all of those teams are always moving forward and very rarely are working on rework. So in the end, I think everything comes out to be much more efficient. Okay, one over there and we'll go over there. Yeah. You sure? I think you were first. But.
Okay. So my last day introduced
Mhm.
if we try to use the more common what are the guy able to understand what you think
So the question is around standardization of the IDE and whether or not people use the same development environments and things like that. So we have had situations where we had two IDEs open on the same project, and then people switch back and forth depending on who's at the keyboard. So that's that. So the computers, we spend a lot of money on the computers because it's 4 developers at that one computer. So you imagine taking your standard development computer and investing 4 times as much money into it, what you can have out of that. So 64 gigs of RAM, stuff like that. So I think the main thing is that we can switch the plugins, we switch keyboard formats as the people get to the computer. And there was this concept of adding that to the mob timer to do the automatic configuration as soon as the mob timer makes you switch the person at the keyboard. I don't think that's been implemented in any of them, but and then also people learn from each other too. So there's kind of a more of a push to move to using more of the keyboard and less of the mouse, and using more shortcuts. And then those shortcuts became really easy to communicate to everyone, because if somebody doesn't know them, we print it out on a piece of paper and tape it to the bottom of that monitor, and then the shortcuts become really easy to incorporate. And somebody that's very junior coming in can be navigated at a very low level, even to the point where they say what shortcut to use, and then they start getting that really quickly as well. So I think right now the teams have gradually moved over to having just a standardized what works best for the entire team. But it started out very diverse, and I don't think there's a problem with it either way. But I think that one thing that was really cool about it was that 4 developers getting together and using each other's IDEs from time to time caused them to kind of find out what was most efficient for working on the code that they were working on, and then going to that rather than holding sacred, that one way of doing the work. And we had some people that were typing at 10 words a minute, and that became a problem too, and that came up in retrospectives. And so there was a period of time where we did a month worth of just typing games to increase typing speed, things along those lines. But typing is rarely the bottleneck in this work, but in that case it was. So, yeah. You had a question over here?
In the video, you are doing more time more program. Is there any breaking time?
So is there a break in the mob? And so this kind of goes to my steamroller example. Anybody can leave the mob at any time, and it keeps going. So actually, you'll in the video, if you look closely, you'll see people peeling off, and there's really no impact. So while you're mobbing, you might say, "Hey, do you mind navigating the rest of this?" And then you can just go do whatever you want, and then come back later. And so in the second video it showed somebody going to do their expense report, but the team was still working without them. And so this again is the concept of zero silos. So if you feel uncomfortable getting up, that's a problem, and we should train each other up to bring the skill level up high enough where we do feel comfortable with that. Yeah.
Is there any the small programming suits to like some sort of software development? For example, like web development, app development, or game development. Like which suit it suits to and which it not suits.
So I've heard a lot of theories on this. So we work on irrigation control systems and internal systems. So we do web applications, desktop applications, and mobile applications. Our mobile team's using Xamarin for cross-platform deployments, and our desktop team is using a combination of legacy WinForms stuff and but using the strangle pattern to move into web technologies on locally hosted web technologies. And then we have a worldwide IoT application meant for supporting hundreds of thousands of users and interacting with our control systems. And that's all hosted on AWS and using Node. And for us, that broad space there that makes it, it's a diverse group, and it keeps things going. I have a theory that it probably works in nearly every environment, especially if you have a repetitive task in any work that anybody does, and people are comfortable doing that repetitive task alone, but they just keep losing time to it. As soon as you're in a mob, you're like, wow, this is taking us a lot of time every time we do it, and somebody will say, let's automate that. And so a lot of the gains that we had were, when we first started mobbing, we had somebody that spent 80% of their day running scripts and fixing production issues. and that was never surfaced until it became transparent when they were in the mob, because then it was like, oh, we could just automate that fix that you just did, and then we never do that work again. So we had two instances of this where we had about 80% of that person's day taken up by fixing production issues, and then saying like, hey, I'm the one helping out here. And so I feel like, in many industries, it is really apparent that there are ways that it can help. And I've heard of mob testing, mob work. So I was at Val Labs yesterday, and they do mob work, and it's like almost every department there is mobbing in some way, which is really cool. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you think Scrum or Kanban?
We're using Kanban, not Scrum. Yeah. So.
How do you solve the project function?
Yeah. So what we do. So there's an article. So we don't do estimation for any of the software that we do. So that's one thing, an important thing to note. And we vertical slice all of the software. So that means that our UI layer, our middle tier layer, and our database layer are all deployed to production every time we commit to the master database. And so what that means for us is that we can deploy as soon as the task's done, and that we break it down to kind of the smallest possible piece. And then we budget areas of software. We don't estimate how long it'll take to get us a certain number of features in. So we save a lot of time on not estimating, and that means that we can invest that time into development. And then all the vertical slices means that anytime that you'd have normally done a feature cut and rolled some things back, we had no waste from that. Because I think a big portion of, a big problem that comes out of feature cutting is that if you horizontally sliced your application tiers, like you made all of the database and all of the middle tier, but the UI is not done, and we have to feature cut, that means there's a bunch of waste there. And so the vertical slicing plus the Kanban helps us show the business that there's progress, consistent progress and predictable progress. And that facilitates communication with the business. And so there's this Harvard Business Review article that talks about budgeting for your Agile project instead of estimating it. And the way that we do the work with Kanban really supports that kind of thought process. And so we just budget the areas that we're going to do. We do as much as we can in that area, and then we release the product, and then go forward from there. We got 5 minutes. More questions? Yeah, please.
Like, so programming is like, you know, when there's someone who's stuck, someone shares the information. How do you like spread that, the knowledge to all the teams, like to the different teams?
Yeah.
Do you do some like documentation or something?
So all of our documentation, so I think early on we defined it as kind of a lofty goal that all documentation would be executable as automated scripts. And so what we did is we adopted a test writing format called Gherkin, which runs on Cucumber. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but the concept there is that they have this given, when, then syntax. You know, given I'm a user, when I click this button, then I should see this happen, right? And then that becomes an automated test script. And so we have what are called feature files written in Gherkin that have the functionality of the entire application documented, and then there's information with the scenario names about why it should do what it should do. And so we actually have automated historical Gantt charts that come out of the system to show, like, this feature's been done, this feature's been done, this feature's been done, because as soon as that test passes, we know that it works because the test has been automated, the documentation has been automated all the way through. And then now, if any developer, even if you replace the entire team, they know to look at the Gherkin tests and then be able to build new software based on that test. And so the Gherkin gets recognized by regular expressions, and then that runs some code in the background, and then those descriptions then become executable steps. And that's how we found that we adopted that about 2 years ago, because before it was just one mob, and we didn't really have the problem of having to share information across those teams. And as soon as we got out of that, we realized there's no way to share how this application works between this many people as we started growing. And so then we said, okay, let's spend our learning sessions figuring out how to do Cucumber, and then incorporate that into our development process. And that quickly became a very successful thing for us. But we had a lot of difficulty with it because some of the UI automation tools are very hard to get a hold of. All right.
Is there any question? If done, let's done this session. And if you have any other question about the question during the break time, you can ask the quiz anytime. Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Nice.